if you've done some reading ahead and you've been with us so far in 1st and 2nd Samuel, you realize that 2nd Samuel chapter 13, we're going to hit on some pretty intense topics. So just a word of warning. We do have older kids all the way up to 6th grade today. So if you're watch, maybe it's like a Netflix show or something, it just pops up TVMA for mature audiences only. That's kind of what today's going to be about. Let's kind of put that out there. So if you're not so sure if you want your kids to hear that or not, just to put that out in full warning. I think though also this could be something good if you're teaching your kids some of these themes. I mean, we want to teach a Christ-centered worldview and how that works in the midst of this craziness that we see in this world around us. I mean, if you were to just watch television for like 5 minutes and just see the craziness of what happens every single day, it's like, wait, that's real life? Like, that's not made up? Like, no, it's real. Everywhere we look. I mean, it's heartbreaking. Like, I can't even watch some news channels now because, you see some article and, I can't hear anymore. Like, the depravity, the brokenness, the pain, the hurt that is happening all around us. I mean, it really can cause you to, go into this weird kind of funk emotionally. It's terrible. And if you read it throughout history, and we see what has gone on, the way that people treat one another, it's just absolutely terrible. It's disgusting. It's brokenness. I mean, it's all those kinds of things. And so this morning, and that's what I love about the Bible. The Bible doesn't sugarcoat any of that stuff. You ever watch my wife is not here, but she loves the Hallmark movies. We talk about this every Christmas. I cannot stand the Hallmark movies. I can't stand them. Thank you. We got some help here, support. Yes. Because none of this is real life. You watch this Hallmark movie and it's all so sweet and all so great, and everybody's like, oh, it's the same story, right? Some girl, some guy, they're going to fall in love, but something happens and they can't. And at the very end, what happens? They fall in love and it's all happily ever after. Oh, it's so sweet, so great. Yeah, it's usually Christmas. How many Christmas movies can we have? Is it possible? Too many. There's way too many. So let's try to get rid of some of those, okay? So that's off my soapbox. But anyways, life is not a Hallmark movie. That's just not how it works. And if we're honest, if I was to sit here and talk to you about your story, you talk to me about my story, we hear all that you've been through, I bet it's pretty intense. I bet it's pretty severe. It won't be starting a lifetime. That's a whole other thing. Right, so we as we think through that, it's just not how life is. And some people have been through terror. They've been through legitimate terror. How do we deal with that? How do we process that? What's our worldview? Because if we just try to bury it and pretend it doesn't exist over here, you're going to be in trouble when it really happens. And we see about David is this man in the Bible, and this is a hero, right? Everybody looks, oh, he's the hero of the Bible. Man, we see David make some terrible, terrible, terrible decisions. And the truth is that depravity that's in David's heart is also in yours and my heart. There's nothing special about us as human beings. We're people who are broken, who desperately need Jesus. And everything in the Bible that points us to is that we are broken people who need Jesus. That's it. That's the central theme of the Bible. We are broken. You need Jesus. Turn to him. Repent of your sins. Believe in him. And he will restore us. That's the beauty that we see, that it doesn't end in this brokenness, but you go all the way to the back. And we see that God restores and redeems. He fixes. He makes us all great. And that's what we get to look forward to. But right now, there's a lot of terrible stuff that happens all around us. And a lot of it is self-induced. We cause it. We bring it on ourselves. And we don't like to take responsibility for that. That's got to be some other thing that did that, or some other circumstance, or some other person. And oftentimes it is. I'm not saying all of it is self-induced. But a lot of it is, we cause our own problems. And it's about time that we admitted that we take responsibility for what things that we actually do. And not only that, but yes, you may have been dealt a terrible hand in life. Maybe all this kind of craziness that's happened around you, that may be who you are and what you've been dealt with. But because of Jesus, we have hope. And as we respond to him, to take ownership in that, that he's won the victory. He fought sin himself and won. He defeated it so that there is no punishment in death. We have only life. And so in life, how do we respond to that? Right? What do we do? Every day is a decision, a conscious decision. I'm going to live for Jesus. I'm going to live for him because of what he's already done and paid for. It's his free gift on the cross. So we're going to talk about today Carnage on the Homefront. This is, again, TVMA. We're going to talk about what has happened and how does this affect us and how should we respond to some of these terrible things. I think about these things around us and we see injustice. And when you see injustices, what happens to you? I mean, I'm not going to get into politics. That's not what I do here. I preach the Bible, teach the Bible. That's my goal. But I think this last example that's been going on the last couple of weeks is just very indicative, right? This is of injustice. The whole Supreme Court nomination, and I'm not going to talk about who is right, who is wrong, or any of that, but I think what I want to highlight here is the circus that happened as a result of this whole Supreme Court justice thing. It was a circus. It was an absolute train wreck. If you were watching it and seeing all this stuff going on, it was just terrible. And you had a man nominated for Supreme Court, and you had someone who says that she was raped by this man. She was accused. She accused him of doing this. Who was right, who's wrong? I'm not getting into that. But the point is, no matter which side of the political aisle you fell on, you probably felt like there was injustice. If he was being falsely accused, that was unjust, right? If that really did happen, that was unjust. And we see these things, and we realize that our world is broken. Our world is absolutely broken. The point of all of this is to point us to our Savior and King Jesus. That he is in control of it all, and he is working his way through all this mess that we have caused by our own sinful actions. And he is going to make it right. He is going to make it right. That is the hope that we have in the Bible. If you're here today and you're like, I'm not so sure if this is, I don't know if I believe this. I don't know if I can, all this terrible stuff that happens in the world. I get where you're coming from. I understand why you would think that. But know this, the reason why we feel this, we feel the injustice, should be a revelation to you that God is real, that he is there, and he's appealing to this idea of objective good. That there is a real thing as good. There's a real thing as righteousness. There's a real thing as morality. And God is redeeming and restoring everything, bringing people to himself. He's going to fix it. And that is a mark of God that he has revealed on your conscience. Let's talk about today. We're going to be 2 Samuel chapter 13. And again, we're going to kind of walk through the story. I think this is going to be just more of a case study of injustice, of just sin and terrible tragedy, and what do we do with that at the end. So let's read through 2 Samuel chapter 13. We're going to be in verse 1. Now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her. And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very crafty man. And he said to him, O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me? Amnon said to him, I love Tamar, my brother, Absalom's sister. Jonadab said to him, lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, let my sister Tamar come and give me bread to eat, and prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it and eat it from her hand. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat from her hand. So let's stop right there for a second. David's got, again, a number of children. He's got several wives. He's got kids kind of all over the place. Amnon would have been, I think, the oldest son of David. So again, ancient times, what's going on, what's happening. Usually the oldest son is going to be the next successor in line for the throne. Typically that's how things go. Remember Bathsheba happened a couple chapters ago. And we talked about Solomon coming after, who's going to be the successor on the throne. And we see that Solomon's reign here, it's going to happen. But we don't, again, David's seeing this in real time, not knowing. There's a lot of speculation here that we're making. But Amnon, oldest son. Absalom was another one of David's sons. And Tamar was Absalom's full sister. Amnon, Absalom, half-brothers, half-sisters. Amnon and Tamar were half-sisters, half-brother. So Amnon sees his sister Tamar, and he lusts after her and wants to have her intimately. So he's making himself sick over this whole thing. And if you see in verse 2, because of the sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. Now again, virginity in the Old Testament, again, this is a sign of, when you got married, your husband knew if you had been with anybody else beforehand. This was a huge shame in Jewish culture. So much so where you could get divorced over it. And so if Tamar were to have sex with him beforehand, she would be basically cast out and cast aside. She would never be able to be married. And so Amnon knows this. Amnon knows he'd get caught. There's no way to hide that. And so he realizes that this is going on and this is what's happening. He wants her, but he realizes he can't do that without getting caught. Verse 2. But Amnon's got a friend, right? And not a great friend, a pretty despicable friend, Jonadab. And Jonadab is like, okay, I'll help you out. Tell me what's going on. So again, it's good to be in good favor with possible successor to the throne. Put you in good graces with what's happening. And he tells his friend Jonadab that he wants to have his sister Tamar. So he helps him conceive of this plan. Well, why don't you lie down and pretend to be sick? And as you pretend to be sick, you tell the king, only Tamar can come in and help me. And so she'll make some cakes. She'll bring him into you. And then at that point, you can have her. Nobody will be around. It's all good. We can make this concoction, this situation, and it'll be great. Yeah, you think about this, right? You guys remember this? I don't even know if it's still on. The Jerry Springer show, is that even on? I don't even know if it is. But this makes Jerry Springer look mild, right? Here's a man's sister that he wants to have, right? And then he's going to get his father, who's king of Israel, to make it all happen, set it all up. So he's making this whole plan to figure out what's going on. Now we're going to talk a little bit about this as we go throughout. But what is eerily similar about this story? I mean, it's not the same. How many chapters ago is David lusting after a woman and concocting a plan for the same thing to happen? Last week we talked about our parent-child dedication, and we talked about our kids. You know, I think a really sobering thing for us as parents, if you have children in the room, is your kids are watching you. They're watching everything you do. And that scares the mess out of me as a dad. I'm like, man, I know what they see. I know they see me. I know they see me lose my cool on the road. I'm impatient or whatever. Or me and Lindsay don't always handle things amicably, right? We're dealing with something. Those kinds of things. I want my kids to know, I want them to see good things from me, not bad things from me. I don't want them to take on bad things. But our kids follow in our footsteps. And generational sin, and I don't know if that's necessarily you're passing it down like a physical, it's some kind of substance, but things are passed down because our kids watch us. They're following in your footsteps. And that should be a sobering thing. That should be a sobering thing to you. Our kids make their own decisions one day. They'll, no matter what, even if you're great parents, awesome parents, we know this, right? Kids are still going to make their own decisions. But there's a lot of strange similarities that our kids pick up from us. And so just as that, we need to recognize that we help to pass on good and bad things to our children. And this is a great example of that. Let's read down in verse 7. Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house where he was lying down, and she took dough and kneaded it and made cakes in his sight and baked the cakes. So she makes the cakes. Her brother's sick. She goes to help her brother. She goes to do that. And she took the pan and emptied it out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, send out everyone from me. So again, he's concocting, he's putting his plan into motion, gets everybody out the room, doesn't want to see what's about to happen. So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food into the chamber that I may eat from your hand. And Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them into the chamber to Amnon, her brother. But when she brought them near him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, come lie with me, my sister. She answered him, no, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this outrageous thing. As for me, where could I carry my shame? And as for you, you would be as one of the outrageous fools in Israel. Now therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. But he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. So David sends Tamar out. Again, Amnon's there. He sends everybody away from his sight, and he brings Tamar into his bedroom. In his bedroom, he brings her close, and he grabs hold of her. As he's grabbing hold of her, he tries to convince her to sleep with him. Tamar does not do that. She says no. It's kind of that, I will not do this. I will not do it. He says, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. She tries to convince him, plead with him. This should not happen in Israel. This is like something we don't do, like appealing to God's law here. We don't do this. This is wrong. This is sin. Then she says, do not do this outrageous thing. As for me, where could I carry my shame? So then she tries to make it personal. Like, not only is this sin just a sin before God, but this is a personal thing. Like, you are going to make my life, like, I can't do anything with my life from here on out because I can't carry it anywhere. It's not like she can start over. And you think, like, things that we can do today, like you could show up in a new city somewhere. If, like, let's say you made some terrible decisions and you want to show up, start a new life and a new city, new place, new job, and you can do that and nobody knows you. And that sounds maybe really appealing from time to time. That way you don't have to deal with anything from your past. You can't do that. This is Israel. She's the daughter of the king, David. You can't just start over somewhere. Where is she going to carry her shame? Then she says, and as for you, so if you don't listen to me, as for you, would you not be one of the outrageous fools? She tries to appeal to his pride. Like, man, you're going to ruin your life. Not only my life, your life is going to be ruined too. Don't make this decision. And then she says, but there's also another option here. Please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. She's appealing to saying, like, let's go to David. If you want to marry me, marry me. Let's at least make this thing marriage in the sight of the king so, like, the shame's not there. She's tried all these different options to get him not to do this. And what does he do? He rapes her. He rapes her. I think we're supposed to see this story and realize this terrible injustice that's happening. I think as we listen and we watch, we hear, we read this, it's supposed to well up emotions in us that says that is absolutely wrong. And when we see stuff in the world, we know that stuff is wrong. When you see things like that, when you see people harming innocent people and the stronger hurting the weaker, it's wrong. It's just straight up wrong. And it's good for us to call it what it is. It's wrong. It's sin. And when we see that kind of thing happening, the strong are supposed to protect the weak. That's how God's order works. That's how he created us. It's how he made us. That's the right order for things to happen. This we see the reverse. It's Satan's disruption and distorting and changing over sinful desires and passions and things. And this is what sin does. It starts out with a desire and it ends with this action that has all this collateral damage. And this is just one of them, right? But bigger picture, what is this even coming from? What's it stemming from? It's David. Remember back with David and Bathsheba. David sins. If you're not familiar with this story, David's on top of his roof. He should be out with war with his men. He sees this woman bathing in the street. He wants to have sex with her, so he calls her into his bedroom. He does. He gets her pregnant. Problem is, she is the wife of one of his best men, his strongest men, his fighters that are out in the war right now. So he's got to cover it up. His plan, his concoction. He brings this man back home. He tries to get this man to sleep with his wife. He doesn't do it. He won't go do it because his men are out. He's like, I can't be in comfort with my wife here as my men are fighting. Like that's wrong. It was wrong of me to do that. He stays. David gets him drunk, tries again, doesn't do it. So David does, the only way to kind of end this, to kind of hide this permanently, he sends him with a letter to go off to his chief of command, Joab. Joab, this is what I want you to do. Send Uriah out. Heaviest part of the fighting, pull back, let him get killed. Well, again, it's hard to kind of have this whole situation happen and kind of pull back without it being really obvious, like, hey, we're going to do this retreat, but not tell Uriah what's going on, and that the men are not involved with the situation. So they send them close to the wall where they have archers. They shoot down. They kill a couple of men. Uriah's one of them. They got too close. He's dead. Problem solved, right? Except for Nathan, the prophet, confronts David and says, what you did was sin. This was wrong. And David says, he repents. He says, I'm sorry. This was wrong. And Nathan says, I'm not going to kill you. God's not going to kill you, so be thankful. But what will happen is that the sword will not depart from your house. And here we're seeing some of the results of David's sinful actions that are now taking part in his own house. It's just terrible, terrible, terrible things. When we look at sin and what it does, now again, we're all broken. We're all sinners. We know that from the day that we start to make those decisions on our own, from our kids all the way up to who we are now today. We make a lot of bad decisions. We're not good people. We're not perfect people. I'm telling you this as a pastor, I'm not a good person by my actions. I'm not. Not the way that God defines good. And every time we make a sinful action, we get consequences as a result of those actions. Maybe some consequences you're still dealing with today from your sinful actions from your past. Now again, God redeems it. He restores it. He uses it. But we still deal with it. It's still real. And David is dealing with the reality of his sinful actions in his past. This is a result of that sin. This is a part of this broken, fallen, perverse world that we live in that's depraved and utterly wicked. How in the world can people do the kinds of things that they do to each other? Because people are sinners, and we're part of that too. We create this. We've created it. And all this stuff that happens, the collateral damage that affects other people and has ripple effects that happen throughout our world. And it's terrible. It's so terrible. Here's what happens with David. Tamar gets violated by Amnon, but the story just continues to get worse, honestly. Like, it doesn't get better from here. It gets worse. Let's look down in verse 15. So you remember Amnon just raped Tamar, verse 15. Then Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. Well, we know what kind of love that is. That's not real love at all that he's talking about here. This is just lust that he has taken out upon his sister. And he hates her for it, as if she did anything. You know, think about just in the way a lot of this kind of stuff works, this particular sin. Typically, that's often that happens, is that the predator who attacks his victim usually hates his victim because of the guilt that they feel personally. You know, as if that's just terrible stuff that's thrown on top of that fire, right? You're already tearing up this lady's life for the rest of her life. And now throw on top of that this shame and guilt that she's feeling from like what he did. That's just, you're supposed to just feel total hatred towards Amnon. And I think honestly, as you read this and you see what Absalom does, you go, yes, thank you. Someone get this guy out of this picture. Like, this is right. Take this guy down. Because you see the injustice and this terrible thing that's happened. And Amnon said to her, get up, go. But she said to him, no, my brother, for this is wrong, and sending me away is greater than the other that you did to me. But he would not listen to her. So he sends her out. He wants nothing to do with her. He's done. He's used her, and he is done. He called the young man who served him and said, put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her. Now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So again, if you were a virgin daughter of the king, you dressed in such a way because you were also shown, hey, these daughters that I have, we're going to marry them off. They're virgin daughters. Verse 18, on the end of verse 19. And Tamar put ashes on her head, which again is a sign of mourning and grief, and tore the long robe that she wore. And she laid her hand on her head and went away crying aloud as she went. Now what she is doing, she's publicly showing her shame and her mourning and her grief all throughout Israel. Ripping the robe signifying grief, but also a sign that my virginity has been taken. I no longer have that. Everybody would know who Tamar was now. I mean, it's not like today where you can hide that kind of thing. Like, it was very visible in the way that they demonstrated those kinds of things. They know physically something wasn't right. Again, as we read the story, it's so perverse, and this injustice that happens around. And I don't think this is just about sexual sin, by the way. I don't think this is what this passage is mainly talking about. That's definitely a piece of it. But I think in that, if we talk about just the way that people use each other, just how people just use each other, whether it's physically, in the sense of this case, rape, but it's also emotional. How many times do people just use one another to get something from them? Right? We want to feel better about ourselves. Maybe we're insecure in who we are in our own identity. So what do? You try to find somebody else who can fulfill this thing inside of you that's empty and broken. That thing that's empty and broken is your sin. Only Jesus can fill that. But we try to fill it with other people. So this is where pornography comes into play. We try to feel or make this thing feel better that's broken. It's where this kind of thing, adultery, takes place. We try to fix what's broken. And we try to have this person come in to make our lives better. And we think, if I just had this person, they'll make me happy. And if I can be happy, then I'll be good. What happens with Amnon right here after he does what he does? He's not happy. He's angry. He's angry. All this brokenness that's inside of our soul that we try to find somebody to make this better. You're not going to take somebody and they're not going to fix that brokenness in you. You're trying to put somebody in the place of Jesus. If you're single and you're looking to get married, a future spouse won't make you happier. It won't. In fact, if you're married, you'll know this, but marriage is one of the most sanctifying things you can ever go through. It reveals more about your sin than anything else I've ever done in my life. I realize how selfish I am and how proud I am through marriage. And I'm not happy about that. It's just real. I realize how much I want to make my own decisions that don't benefit my wife. How many times do I want to do things that are just for me? And covenant marriage, biblical marriage, is all about that we sacrifice for our spouse. We sacrifice our own interest for the sake of our spouse. We give up who we are for the sake of them. Because this is what Jesus did for us. Jesus came after you and me as a broken person, and it's an enemy of God, and he says, I'm going to redeem you, I'm going to save you, I'm going to make you one of my children. How do we treat enemies? We dispose of them. Jesus didn't dispose of us. He came after us. That's the gospel. That's the picture of the gospel right there. He came after you and he came after me. As broken as we were, as perverse as we are, and we wanted to unseat him from his throne, and he says, I still want you. I still want you. This is the gospel. This is what Jesus does for us. And this is how we are supposed to live as covenant people of God, as children of the King. We live this way. We love this way. We treat others this way. This picture here that we see is sin. It's Satan's method of trying to use people to fulfill these longings and needs in our heart that nobody else can fill but God himself. And if you're sitting here today and you're thinking, man, I'm broken. I know I'm broken. Maybe you're married. I want my spouse to fulfill this. Maybe you're single. I want somebody else to fulfill this. Maybe you're thinking of in a sense of toying with the affair of an adulterous relationship. It's not going to fix anything. Your need is Jesus. And until you get that right, you are going to be broken without hope in this world. Only Jesus can fulfill that. Only Jesus can fulfill that. Man, we make so many decisions that are based on this fleeting glimpse of happiness. We can't even define what this happiness is. If you were to try to explain happiness to somebody else, what makes you happy? What makes you feel great? And you could try to maybe come up with something that makes you feel happy, and you make this definition. Tomorrow it'll change. It just does. It's just what we do as people. Happiness changes all the time. I think my kids are just like, I think of the way they love like toys. You ever just bought them something that you thought this is really awesome? And then like my son just turned like 3. So he's getting these toys and he's loving it. He's like playing with the box over here. You're like, I just got you this awesome toy. What are you doing? Like, it's a box. He's like loving it. He's like pretending he's in a spaceship or something, or he's got his house, and he thinks this is the coolest thing ever. And it's just like you see it in your kids, like they go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and it's because the toy doesn't make them happy. Or if you ever like play at a friend's house, and like their toys are always cooler than their toys, no matter what. And then even if they were to get that same toy, it's no longer cool anymore. And that's just really human nature. We see it in our children. It's who we are as people. We're looking for one toy to the next toy to the next toy to the next toy, trying to fulfill this longing in our heart that can only be fulfilled by Jesus himself. What is your hope? Where is your hope? Where is your happiness? Is it fulfilling you? Is it sustaining you? Is it making you happy? Or are you still broken? Are you still broken? We see the injustice here. We feel this hatred towards Amnon. I mean, I read this and I'm thinking, yes, this guy needs to be punished. When is someone going to come along and take care of this guy? Well, we see in verse 20 the story about Absalom. And her brother Absalom said to her, has Amnon, your brother, been with you? Again, he sees that she's now, after leaving his house, she's got ashes on her head. Her virgin robe is ripped. Has Amnon, your brother, been with you? Absalom's a smart guy. He knows something is up. You tell his sister has gone through something pretty traumatic. Now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart. So Tamar lived, a desolate woman, in her brother Absalom's house. When King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. You think, okay, all right, good. He's angry. This is good. We're going to see justice here. Okay, we're ready for the justice to happen. Let's go. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. So Absalom kind of plays this thing kind of cool. He doesn't talk to Amnon, good or bad. He doesn't say any good thing to him. He doesn't say any bad thing to him. It's like if you ever had maybe it's a boss or something you really don't like, but you're not going to say anything bad because you don't want to like upset the apple cart right away. You're going to say anything good because you don't want to lie. So you just have this kind of, okay, yep, I'll do it. Yep, sounds great. Like this is the kind of relationship that Amnon and Absalom have now. It's not like I'm not going to be friends with you because I hate your guts, but I'm not going to reveal my cards yet. I'm not going to show them that I hate your guts because Absalom is now conceiving of a plan. I think the other thing we see here, and again, this is somewhat of an argument from silence, but I think what we see in the overall picture of the narrative, this is what the author wants us to see. Who is absent in enacting the justice that needs to be enacted? It's David. David is the king of Israel. He has the role of the sword, the gavel, and he's a protective father. His job is to protect Israel from the enemies of outside. His job also is to enact justice in his kingdom, that God has given him the role of judge. And he's also a protective father. This is his children. Now, as we were kind of talking about it this week, just thinking about this, just think about it just for a second from David's perspective. If Amnon is possibly the next in line king, this is his son that he loves. He cares about. This is his child. And Tamar is also his daughter. And this made him angry. But he does nothing. What should he have done? I mean, we do know that in situations like this, Old Testament law, this is a capital punishment. Amnon's life should have been taken. We do know that from the way that Israel operated, the way that they worked. David's job was to fulfill that role, and take out justice. He did not do that. And in some ways, I empathize with him as in a stance of this happened to your kids and you love them all and you're totally upset and distraught and you hate that this happened, but you don't want to lose a child out of this. You don't lose your son. But even though this should happen, it's right for this to happen. He has a role that he's supposed to do and to take place, and he doesn't do it. He doesn't enact justice. We're left with seeing this injustice happen. And I think when we talk specifically about justice, we talk about justice in this world and we try to make our own judgments. And again, this whole Supreme Court thing is just such a great example. How many people are sitting there in their Facebook comments talking about what should happen and shouldn't happen, and as if they know everything that happened? And this is something that happened, like 40 years ago? And everybody's like making all their pronouncements online as if we're some kind of like armchair judge. Like, I know what should happen. This is what's going on. You remember this like old judge shows? I don't think they have anymore, like Judge Judy and A People's Court. Those are awesome. I love like just hearing these ridiculous things that would happen to people, and then the judge would arbitrate. And it'd be like, yeah, my neighbor, he took my toaster, and then like I need like $8 million because that was a good toaster. So I'm suing him for this toaster because I want my money back. And the judge, Judy's like, you're stupid. That's dumb. What are you talking about? Like, no. Like, and we play that like armchair judge. We know what's best. We know what should happen. Like, we should be the one. If we were in that seat, we'd make it all right. You're not God. None of us are God. When we look at these situations, we know that it's unjust, but you know what makes us bad gods and bad judges is because we're guilty too. It's bad when your judge is guilty and he's also making pronouncements of the same thing, because what's he going to do? Man, he's going to make bad judgments. What just happened to David? David has this whole situation. God showed him grace and spared his life. Again, it's a speculation. It's not here in the text, but you can empathize. Like, his son Amnon, maybe he's seeing himself in his son. Maybe he's come to this realization, this is what I've caused. I don't want to lose my son over a similar situation. Now, again, it says in the family, it's wrong. Again, it was arguable. Bathsheba thing, is that consensual or not? We don't know. This is obviously rape. This is obviously wrong. However, David could be thinking something like that. And seeing it, he's not, at least not enacting justice clearly. We make wrong judgments because we're bad judges, and this shows us that we need Jesus. We need Jesus. Jesus is perfect in his judgment. He's perfect in his judgment, and even better than that, he offers us what we shouldn't receive, which is the grace and mercy that come from his gift on the cross. As we sang, Christ alone, in him the wrath of God was satisfied. God looked at us as enemies, and this is what he does. He put his own son to suffer that punishment on the cross, to absorb the full wrath that you and I should have taken. And he says, I'm going to take this wrath. I'm going to absorb that for you. And he does that. Jesus takes that on. He suffered all that pain and misery that he did because he loved you and he loved me, so that we can become part of his family, his children. And this is what he does. It's an amazing, beautiful thing. But again, this unjust thing happens. So let's read a little further. Verse 23. After 2 full years, Absalom had sheep shears at Baal Hazor. I think 2 full years for Absalom to plan this hatred and bitterness that was seeped in his own soul to enact justice for his sister, which is near Ephraim. And Absalom invited all the king's sons. And Absalom came to the king and said, behold, your servant has sheep shears. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant. Now, why did Absalom invite all the king's sons? Again, this is another one of those speculation things. We don't know. Is it because he was trying to make a statement to show to everybody that this is what justice that should have happened to Amnon? Was he trying to make a statement to David to make him fear the loss of his own brothers? We don't know. But I think it's interesting that all the brothers were there, all the king's sons were there to see this happen. But the king said to Absalom, no, my son, let us all go, lest we be burdensome to you. He pressed him, but he would not go, but gave him his blessing. So Absalom is trying to get all to go, including the king. Then Absalom said, if not, please let my brother Amnon go with us. So Amnon's got to be there for this to happen. And the king said to him, why should he go with you? But Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and let all the king's sons go with him. So again, Amnon's oldest son, probably been pretty instrumental in helping to rule the kingdom with David. He's probably right next to him. You think your oldest son, you want him to see how the kingdom works and operates and goes. Verse 28, then Absalom commanded his servants, mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not fear, have I not commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. So Absalom tells his guys to be ready to kill Amnon when I give you the command. We're going to get him nice and drunk so he's ready. He can't fight back, and we're going to take him down. But Absalom, let's see, so in verse 29, so the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each mounted his mule and fled. The sons see this happen. Another one of their brothers gets killed. What's going on? What's happening? Are we having a coup? Who knows what's going to happen? So they all just leave. Verse 30, while they were on the way, news came to David. Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, and not one of them is left. Just, man, that devastation. All of his sons at once. He's thinking he's lost all his kids. And the king arose and tore his garments and lay on the earth, and all his servants who were standing by tore their garments. But Jonadab, similar name, you remember Jonadab earlier on? Amnon's buddy? Jonadab, the son of Shimea, David's brother, said, let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead. It's interesting Jonadab is giving this news. I don't really know what that means textually, but I think that's interesting. For by the command of Absalom, this has been determined from the day he violated his sister Tamar. Now therefore, let not my lord the king so take it to heart as to suppose that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon alone is dead. So again, David is just absolutely devastated. And this should have happened, I think, by David's hand. I think we see that here. It's clearly marked. Verse 34, but Absalom fled, and the young man who kept the watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, many people were coming from the road behind him by the side of the mountain. And Jonadab said to the king, behold, the king's sons have come, as your servant said, so it has come about. And as soon as he had finished speaking, behold, the king's son came and lifted up their voice and wept. And the king also and all his servants wept very bitterly. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. And David mourned for his son day after day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. Now just think about this, and I don't think it's any accident. Where does Absalom go after he does this? He leaves in exile. What's so similar about this story? What did David do not so long ago? He's fleeing Saul. Saul was an unjust king, and he fled into the wilderness into the hands of other kings. Like father, like son, right? You were seeing this happen. And in that situation, in Saul and David, Saul was the unjust one. David is just. I think we're seeing this and thinking Absalom did what David was supposed to do. And that was enact justice. Now we'll see as we continue to go, Absalom lets this seed of bitterness go in and just rip him apart, and it causes some, again, just terrible tragedy. But we see this story, and I think it brings out this tragedy, and I think it's supposed to bring out tragedy. I think we're supposed to see the suffering and pain of the story, and we're to think this is absolutely terrible. This should not happen. Justice was not taken by David. He did not fulfill his role and duty. And on top of that, we see ultimately this is a result of his own sin. When we look at the brokenness and fallenness around us in the world, and we see what needs to happen, needs to be fixed, needs to be restored, it needs to be redeemed. But the truth is, it's not going to be redeemed and restored by human hands. Just to give you a little spoiler alert, no matter what our strategies are, no matter what governments are in power, no matter what philosophy rules the day, it's not going to fix the brokenness in the human heart because we're wicked. We're wicked people. And unless Jesus comes in and changes people, we're not going to see true redemption, true restoration, true healing of our land and our world. We need Jesus. We need Jesus. We need Jesus. Our goal, our role for us as believers, we should be falling down before on our knees in prayer, praying for this brokenness around us, that God would fix it, that God would restore it, that God would enter into human hearts, show them the weight of their sin, and redeem them, save them, help them see the wickedness that's in their own soul. We hope to pray for kings and leaders and presidents and governors and mayors and senators and congressmen and all those people, that God would reveal this brokenness. And more importantly, that God would reveal the brokenness in your own heart. That you would see that and you would see how truly wicked you really are. And not blame everything else around you, but take responsibility and ownership. You are wicked and you need Jesus, and I need Jesus. This step starts with us, you and me, getting on our face before a holy and righteous and just God and say, God, forgive me. I am a sinner. I need you, Jesus, to save my soul. And if you are a follower of Christ, you've prayed that. That has been your posture. That's been your heart. From there on, every day, we have to realize that God's good grace is what keeps us going, that he keeps moving us, and he allows us to continue to live and breathe and serve him. And so every day, we're living it for our King and Lord Jesus Christ. That's our purpose, our singular purpose in this world, that we live for him, that we exalt his name, that we share his message of hope with the world around us, that Jesus came to save sinners. And all this brokenness around, he's ready and willing to take people in and make him his sons, make him his daughters, give him all that he has. This is the gospel picture. It's such a beautiful thing. And this brokenness that we see, it's meant to shake us up. It's meant for us to see it and for our hearts to be broken over that, to be hurt over that we see those things and realize from them for what they are. But we need Jesus. We need Jesus. Do you realize the brokenness in your own soul? Have you come to terms with that? And have you asked Jesus to save you from that brokenness? Let's pray.